Hi, today I'm going to be talking about our senses. We'll start with our general senses. It's the senses that you feel basically in your skin: temperature, pain, touch, pressure, vibration. And proprioception is the sense of where you are in space, where your muscles and joints are in space. And these senses are picked up by sensory receptors, so we're going to talk about different kinds of sensory receptors. The simplest being just the dendrites of sensory neurons, and we call these free nerve endings. And these free nerve endings aren't very specific, and a lot of things will stimulate them, such as pressure or temperature. So here's an overall view of all of our general sensory receptors. Nociceptor detects pain. Thermoreceptors detect temperature, both cold and hot. Mechanoreceptors detect changes in a membrane, and these would include proprioceptors, baroreceptors, and tactile receptors. And then chemoreceptors will detect changes in pH or oxygen or CO2, some specific chemical in the blood. So these receptors are classified by what is going to stimulate them. So a nociceptor is stimulated by pain, and these have very large receptive fields. Some of these fibers are slow, which would be an achy pain, and some of these fibers are fast, which would be acute pain. Thermoreceptors in our skin, our muscles, and elsewhere detect hot and cold. Mechanoreceptors detect plasma membrane pressure, maybe touching, distorting that membrane. So proprioceptors monitor position of joints and muscles. Baroreceptors detect pressure changes in a variety of places, such as in the walls of blood vessels, in the walls of the bladder. And tactile receptors detect touch, pressure, sensation. Again, chemoreceptors respond to chemicals dissolved in the blood. So the greatest diversity of general sensory receptors are found in the skin. The skin can feel just about everything. So tactile responses are used for diagnosis. For example, you can determine areas of spinal nerve damage by touching some areas of the skin. So here are the general sensory receptors in the skin, and we will talk about all of these. We've mentioned the free nerve endings. They are merely the dendrites of sensory neurons branching. They're not specific. There's no protective covering, and they respond to touch, pain, temperature. And they're quite common in the skin. The root hair plexus surrounds that hair follicle and can distinguish any type of movement that would cause that hair follicle to move. Tactile discs detect fine touch and pressure. These are in the more superficial region of the skin. A tactile corpuscle is also called a Meissner's corpuscle, and this is a little bit different in that it's an enclosed capsule. It detects fine touch and pressure. Again, these are fairly superficial in the skin. Deeper in the skin, you'll find lamellated corpuscles. These are also called Pacinian corpuscles, and these are more sensitive to deeper pressure and vibration. Ruffini corpuscles are sensitive to pressure, and these are, again, even still deeper into the dermis. And here are some examples of baroreceptors, examples of locations of baroreceptors in the body. So the carotid sinus and aortic sinus, let's go back to look at where that is. And you can see up by the heart, the aortic sinus and the carotid sinus have baroreceptors. So right up there, the blood pressure is extremely high because it's being pumped quite vigorously out of the heart. And so these are monitoring our blood pressure. The lungs are going to monitor how much the lungs expanded. The colon can monitor how much fecal matter and triggers defecation. The digestive tract monitors volume and triggers the reflex movement along the digestive tract. And the urinary bladder wall has baroreceptors that monitor the volume and trigger urination. Chemoreceptors are located throughout the body as well, and these detect small changes in concentrations of specific chemicals. So in the carotid bodies, which are up in the carotid, the carotid is an artery that goes, that branches off the aorta and goes up to the brain. In the carotid bodies, the pH, carbon dioxide, and oxygen levels are monitored. And in the aortic bodies, in the aorta, again, we're going to monitor pH, carbon dioxide, and oxygen levels. Special senses is a completely different section. Special senses are in the head. Of course, we have skin on our head that contain general senses, but the 5 special senses include smell, taste, sight, hearing, and balance. These receptors are pretty complex, as you'll see, the ear and the eye being the most complex. They're located in sense organs and are protected with surrounding tissue. And the information from these special senses is distributed to special areas of the cerebral cortex for processing. You do need to know some new words. Olfaction means smell. You can think of olfactory. Olfactory is smell. And gustation is taste. Olfactory sensory receptors are modified neurons. Gustation or taste sensory receptors are specialized receptor cells. Both of these sensory receptors are exposed to the environment, and the receptors are in epithelia. The information from these receptors is sent directly to the cerebral cortex for processing. An interesting thing about many of these senses is the use of hair cells. We will see hair cells in olfaction and hair cells in taste. For example, you can see the tiny little extensions at the taste receptor. Those little modifications that look like cilia are called hair cells. Sensory receptors are protected from the external environment in the internal ear. There's a bony bony covering to our hearing receptors. Yet still inside that bony covering are going to be hair cells. And so here's another picture of those hair cells. And when those hair cells are stimulated, they stimulate an action potential to the nervous system. Our sense of smell is provided by paired olfactory organs in the nasal cavity. They're pretty high up, about the size of a quarter. And what happens is molecules in the air have to dissolve on that olfactory patch. So it must be moist, and as few as 4 molecules can activate that olfactory receptor. So when you smell something, it is because you are smelling molecules that have entered your body and have dissolved on your olfactory patch. So our sensory neurons are stimulated by chemicals in the air. The axons leave this olfactory patch and collect into bundles, and then these bundles are going to travel out of the nasal cavity and go through the ethmoid bone. The ethmoid bone, if you were looking down at a skull that's had the top cut off, you would see many tiny holes in this bone because this is where these this nervous tissue from the olfactory patch comes from. And then these axons are going to leave the olfactory bulb to form the olfactory tract. You saw the olfactory bulb on the underside of the sheep brain. And then this information is distributed to the olfactory cortex, the limbic system, and hypothalamus. The limbic system is our emotions, and people often have a very strong emotional response and memories associated with smell. So here you can see the nose, the odorants in the rose. Those molecules are leaving the rose, traveling in the air, landing on that patch, the olfactory epithelium, and that that nervous tissue will go through the bone and combine in the olfactory bulb, which becomes the olfactory tract. Our sense of taste requires hair cells as well. It tells us information about foods and liquids. And our taste receptors are not only on the tongue, but also in the back of the throat. On our tongue are what are called lingual papillae, and those are what you see when you look at your tongue, those bumps. Those bumps are not taste buds, they're lingual papillae. So there's different kinds of lingual papillae. In the upper right, you can see the circumvallate papillae, and in those papillae, you can see deeper down are the actual taste buds. So the molecules of food have to, again, dissolve in fluid. That's why we make saliva. And those dissolved food particles will fall down into the crevice into the taste bud, stimulating the hairs of the hair cells of the taste bud. Each one of these circumvallate papillae has about 100 taste buds in it. And the fungiform papillae also contain taste buds. You can see where they're located. And the filiform papillae do not contain taste buds. We've always been told that there are 4 major tastes: sour, bitter, salty, and sweet, but there's a 5th called umami, and that's more savory, like beef broth. We also have water receptors in the back of the throat.